This is The Crack Epidemic, covered by Brianna Dukes. Nowadays, we see people on the streets who appear to be on drugs, and instantly we judge them. We label them as crackheads, characterize them as dirty. We laugh, we point, we crack jokes. We don't see them as equals, we see them as inferior. People wonder, how could they let this happen? How could they just let go? There is a concerning amount of empathy that's lacked, and an unfortunate amount of victim blaming. I think that the questions that we should be asking are, how did they come to be this way? Who provided them with the means to get this way? Where did this all start? These are the questions that I'm aiming to answer throughout the duration of this project. Let's start from the beginning. Powdered cocaine, or cocaine hydrochloride, didn't originate from the United States. The crop comes from countries in South America with an appropriate climate for growth. Its introduction to the United States for the purpose of recreational use didn't happen until, essentially, the 1960s. The increased use of cocaine for recreational use in the 1960s caught the attention of Richard Nixon, who was president at the time. On June 17th of 1971, President Richard Nixon gave his speech, remarks about an intensified program for drug abuse prevention and control. In that speech, he spoke these infamous words.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize for you the meeting that I have just had with the bipartisan leaders, which began at 8 o'clock and was completed 2 hours later. I began the meeting by making this statement, which I think needs to be made to the nation. America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. I have asked the Congress to provide the legislative authority and the funds to fuel this kind of an offensive.
With this speech, a campaign known as the War on Drugs began. As wholesome as the project might seem, the intentions of Richard Nixon might not have been. In an interview given in 1994 between journalist Dan Baum and President Richard Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Ehrlichman, we see another side of this campaign. Ehrlichman was quoted as saying, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." Unfortunately, this interview took place after all the havoc that ensued. The public was not warned about the impact that the war on drugs would have on his people until it was too late. President Richard Nixon's war on drugs was now far fleshed out. For the most part, efforts for his cause were minimal. After Nixon's presidency came Jimmy Carter. This resulted in a slight halt on the war on drugs. This was until the presidency of Ronald Reagan. With Ronald Reagan's presidency came the expansion of this war on drugs. Reagan's presidency started the year of 1981. In the 1980s, the focus on drugs shifted to being primarily on crack, with crack coming to being in the 1980s. Crack, compared to powdered cocaine, was a lot cheaper. It was easier to produce and, therefore, easier to sell. It was also much cheaper for consumers to purchase. The mix of all these things contributed to the instant popularity of crack cocaine. This, along with the addictive high of the substance. Between 1982 and 1985, the number of cocaine users increased by 1.6 million people. This increase, along with Ronald Reagan's handling of substance-related charges, was a hard-hitting combination for many people, with some groups getting hurt from this more than others. Reagan went hard with his campaign. Even his wife, Nancy Reagan, contributed. Nancy Reagan launched an anti-drug campaign, the Just Say No campaign, starting September 14th, 1986. The campaign was a very public one, involving a number of celebrities, advertisements, etc.
In the next few months, the motion picture industry and theater owners We'll be bringing you a series of messages like the one you just saw. I don't think anybody will miss the point. The thrill can kill. The drug dealers need to know that we want them out of our schools, neighborhoods, and our lives. And the only way to do that is to take the customers away from the product. Say no to drugs and say yes to life.
Of course, your local drug pusher may tell you a little something different about these drugs. And who you believe is up to you. But then again, if you go ahead and try them, at least it won't be out of ignorance. Just stupidity. What would I do if someone offered me these drugs? I'd tell them to take a hike.
This campaign helped to raise public concerns about drug use. This allowed Ronald Reagan's campaign and legislation to get the funding that he desired. The U.S. Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, which allocated $1.7 billion to the war on drugs and established a series of mandatory minimum prison sentences for various drug offenses. This mandatory minimum featured a questionable relationship between crack and powdered cocaine and how the sentencing was handled. According to Brennan Center for Justice, there was a 100-to-1 ratio between crack and powder cocaine sentences. Possession of 5 grams of crack led to an automatic 5-year minimum sentence, while it took 500 grams of powder cocaine to trigger that sentence. This was especially concerning, considering that, according to Britannica, approximately 80% of crack users were African American. This sentencing led to mass incarceration of many black individuals. Despite changes having taken place, and drugs and drug addicts not being as widely vilified anymore, the side effects of all of this still remain. To this day, people remain incarcerated for crack charges that, if they had been measured up to the same standard as the charges that are dealt out for possession of powder cocaine, would be serving sentences that are considerably shorter than the ones that they face, or would even be released. According to Crockett House, today, those currently serving crack cocaine sentences are roughly 78.9% black, 14.3% Hispanic, and 6.4% white, meaning that the majority of those serving longer sentences because of the crack cocaine distinction are people of color. This means that, to this day, black people are still disproportionately affected by the sentencing. The war on drugs and the crack epidemic still have lasting effects on black people and black society to this day. People should stop to consider in which ways these things impact the wellness of black Americans as a whole in the modern day. For example, prison statistics are used against black individuals to paint a picture of them that isn't a reflection of what they truly are. They are used to make arguments in support of racism that vandalize the reputations of black people as a collective. This incarceration of black people also impacts black children. According to the National Library of Medicine, the results show that parental absence is negatively associated with the development of left-behind children. Left-behind children have a lower cognitive test score and academic test scores, and they are less likely to attend a college. This means that children who have absent parents due to charges against them for drug offenses are negatively impacted by this. All of this to say, people don't truly understand how large of a deal crack has been and continues to be within society. People continue to villainize those who are suffering at the hands of drugs. It was the villainization of these people that led them to these situations in the first place. Some people were born already facing the effects of the crack epidemic, whether it be from the incarceration of their parents or family, proximity to drug use, or society's already negative expectations. It is better to approach situations with knowledge and with empathy rather than ignorance and apathy.